Screencast, we'll be presenting to you the results of the work undertaken in Stage 3 of the ReQoL project. To recap, the aim of the project is to construct an outcome measure that can be used with people with mental health conditions. In Stage 1, we agreed on 7 themes, and in Stage 2, we generated an item pool that you commented on around December of last year. Through the consultation process, we received some extremely valuable comments, which we have categorized as generic comments and specific comments. Turning to generic comments, first, it was clear that there were issues with the severity response scale that we proposed. Therefore, we introduced another stage to the project, which we named Stage 3B, where we interviewed a convenience sample to test the most appropriate response options. I'll come back to this point later in this screencast. Second, our positive and negative items at different ends of a continuum. Well, in fact, we do not have an answer to this question yet. It may be something that we can explore in the psychometrics analysis. However, what we have done so far is to maintain the integrity of the way in which service users describe their quality of life. That is, if they used a positive language, we stuck with it, and if they use a negative language, we retained that as well. The third set of comments, there were suggestions to increase the recall period of the ReQoL questionnaire to 2 weeks from 1 week period. This was so that it is in line with other measures that are currently being collected in the NHS. We have discussed this at length, and there is a lot of evidence about a recall period beyond a week being fairly unreliable. Therefore, considering this, and as well as the population that we're interested in, we have decided for now at least to stick with the 1 week period recall. In terms of specific comments, we received detailed comments on the items that we proposed. These were analysed using content analysis and were fed in the decision-making process of finalising the ReQoL questionnaire that you'll see today. I'll come back to this a little later again. The aim of Stage 3 was to produce a questionnaire that can be used with service users in Stage 4A to collect data for psychometrics analysis. To achieve this, it was important to test the face and content validity of the items. That is, to test whether the items make sense to the service users and whether they measure what we want them to measure. Interviews were carried out between mid-September and early December of last year by 3 interviewers, including 1 service user researcher, at 4 different trusts and 1 charity. A list of 90 questions was presented by theme to participants. Each participant didn't necessarily see all the themes, but interviewers ensured that enough people commented on each theme. Service users were asked if the theme was important to them. Second, whether it was easy or not to answer the question. Third, in cases where there were several items tapping the same theme, service users were asked to choose the best one. And finally, service users were asked whether there was a better way asking the same question. We interviewed 59 service users through 40 individual interviews, 2 focus groups, and 4 what we're calling pseudo-focus groups, as there were only 2 people who attended. Service users interviewed had a wide range of diagnoses, and these included schizophrenia, depression, bipolar, psychosis, OCD, anxiety, Asperger's syndrome, post-traumatic stress disorder, cognitive impairment, agoraphobia, and eating disorder. The service users were aged between 19 and 79 with an average age of 52 years. 77% of those interviewed were of white ethnic background. All interviews were audio recorded and then transcribed. 2 researchers carried out content analysis and for each item recorded the following. First, what service users liked. Second, what they did not like or objected to. And finally, what service users found confusing, ambiguous, or even misunderstood the item. The items were ranked by popularity to indicate an intensity of preference. To assess the response scales, we interviewed 14 non-academic staff at the University of Sheffield. 8 participants saw the severity scale and 6 participants saw a frequency scale. First, it was difficult for participants to answer the question over the last week using the severity scale. Second, the labels moderately, extremely were often seen as inappropriate, unrealistic or vague. On the whole, the frequency scale worked much better and participants did not struggle to fill in the questionnaire. Therefore, this left us with 2 possible options. First, to use 2 different scales, or to use just the frequency scale. We have chosen to use 2 different scales and I'll come back and explain this a little bit later. In selecting the 60 items out of 90 items, the overarching principle was that since ReQoL is a service users outcome measure, the views of service users were the departure point for deciding whether to keep an item in or not. First, we took into consideration the feedback from service users based on the popularity of items. We then took into consideration feedback from 4 different sources. First, a translatability assessment was performed for us by the company MAPI group. This is to test how the items might work in different countries or cultures. Second, as I mentioned earlier, we performed content analysis on items from the comments from our advisory and stakeholder group members. These were fed into the process of deciding or selecting items. Third, to ensure clinical inputs, we interviewed 11 clinicians at 2 NHS trusts. Finally, we took the feedback of people interviewed in stage 3B, that's the convenience sample with the University of Sheffield staff. Though the purpose was not to comment on specific items, people did. So therefore, we use their feedback too. As you can see, we started the process of generating an item pool from a number of quality of life, recovery measures and from our manuscripts. We had about 1,600 items at the start. Using a set of criteria from Norman and Striner, we sifted through and with inputs from our governance groups and experts groups, we managed to reduce that to 87 items. The items were reviewed by service users in stage 3 and another 10 items were added. Finally, we reviewed the feedback from service users and other sources to reduce the number of items to 59, which is the questionnaire you're going to see today. We had to grapple with 2 other issues. The first one on physical health. The main issue was that service users took their mental health into consideration when answering the physical health questions. For instance, on the self-care item, service users took it to be a question on motivation. Among the options we considered, the 2 possible ones are to have 1 or 2 physical questions mixed with the others, or have a separate section introduced by something along the lines, now thinking of your physical health. Answer the following questions. So we decided to go with the latter, that is, thinking of your physical health in a different section. I'll come back to this later. The second issue was on ordering and clustering of items. We found little in the literature to help us on this issue. First, we considered whether to separate positive and negative items, and secondly, whether to mix them up. We decided to mix them up as this is what most measures did. Then there were three more options to consider. First, order items by theme, use name of themes, and finally, order the items randomly. With the issues we found with names of themes, not the themes themselves, we are not naming themes, and we have decided to order the items randomly, ensuring that the first and last items on the questionnaire are not potentially off-putting or upsetting. Ideally, we would have liked to test this, but given the time frame we're working with, this has not been possible. So among the number of items, out of the 59, 39 of them are negatively worded and 20 are positively worded. In some of the themes, for instance the well-being theme and the ill-being theme and the self-perception themes, there are significantly more negative items than positive items. The questionnaire of 59 items is available separately and not presented in this screencast, but you will be able to look at it separately. And that's where we have got two sections, and the first section is mainly mental health, and the second section, which contains 4 sections, is based on physical health. In terms of next steps, after we receive the comments from our advisory and stakeholder groups, we will finalise the questionnaire for Stage 4A. We expect to start data collection on the 2nd of March for a period of 3 months. We are aiming for a sample size of well over 1,000. 11 NHS trusts are set up for Stage 4A, and they're listed here. Recruitment will happen by mail or in person. We're also recruiting from 6 GP practices in Sheffield and 4 charities nationally, 1 trial and 1 online panel of mental health service users. Data collection ends in May and data analysis will take place in June and July. We expect a long ReQoL and a short ReQoL questionnaire to be ready by then and to be handed to the Department of Health by August of this year. We would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge everyone who has made it possible to get to this stage. They include service users who participated in the interviews, participants of the University of Sheffield, staff at Bradford District Care Trust, Ardash, Central and North West London, South West London and St George's Trust, and OCD Action Sheffield. We would also like to thank clinicians and R&D staff at Sheffield Health and Social Care Trust and South West Yorkshire Trust who've helped us with the focus groups. We'd like also to thank MAPI Group for the translatability assessment, the service user researcher involved in Stage 3A interviews, and last but not least, would like to acknowledge the members of our scientific group, our advisory group, nationally and internationally, stakeholders groups and our expert groups. Thank you for listening to this screencast and your interest and involvement in the ReQoL project.